They had never seen anything like it. A female grizzly bear, one of the most powerful land predators in North America, was being suffocated in the middle of a remote Yellowstone road. But it wasn't by a rival predator, nor by a man-made trap. No, this was something far more foreign, far more terrifying. A python. Not just any python. This one was massive, over 20 feet long, thick as a fence post, coiled around the bear like a living vice, crushing her rib cage tighter with every convulsion. And it didn't belong here. The bear was twitching, choking. Her front claws scraped uselessly at the asphalt. Her mouth opened in a soundless cry, her massive frame growing limp as oxygen fled her body. Ranger Tyler Nash had seen a lot in his years at Yellowstone. Wolves on the hunt, injured elk, even a cougar with broken teeth. But nothing had prepared him for this. He dropped his coffee. The tin cup bounced once on the pavement, splashing lukewarm brown liquid across his boots. Tyler grabbed his staff from the back of his truck and ran. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Nash," he shouted into his radio. "We have an emergency. Female grizzly under attack by a python. Repeat, a python. Not native. We need backup now." The bear's eyes flicked to him. Even in the throes of suffocation, she seemed aware. A dim, desperate glimmer locked onto Tyler as if begging for something more than help. Tyler took a cautious step forward. The snake hissed, its triangular head raised just enough to track his movement. He didn't have a gun. Only a staff, some bear spray, and 1,000 adrenaline-fueled thoughts crashing through his mind. Then the woods behind him exploded. A roar tore through the trees, shaking branches, scattering birds into the sky. Tyler spun around just in time to see it. A full-grown male grizzly bear charging from the forest like a freight train of fur and muscle, eyes locked not on the ranger but on the python. Time froze. The male didn't hesitate. He slammed into the snake with full force, snapping its coils with a brutal swipe. The python tried to adjust, tightening around the female in a desperate final grip. Too late. The male grizzly was a whirlwind, biting, clawing, roaring with an ancient fury. The python reared up, hissing in rage and pain, but the bear was relentless. Blood sprayed across the pavement. The snake's skin split in places. The female let out a wheezing gasp as the pressure around her chest began to ease. Tyler shouted into the radio again. "We're at Flat Ridge Pass. The male's attacking the python. Send tranquilizers. Bring the vet." More trucks arrived. 3 rangers leapt out. "Help him!" Tyler yelled. "Don't hit the bears. Distract the snake." A shot fired into the air. Another ranger jabbed at the python's tail with a long pole. The snake thrashed, then uncoiled, slithering off into the grass in a bloody broken heap. The female bear collapsed. Her body hit the ground with a heavy thud, but the male wasn't done. He stood over her, panting, bleeding from his forearms, chest heaving with primal rage and something deeper. He didn't run, didn't leave. He stayed. Every ranger stood frozen. Even the forest seemed to go quiet, the birds silenced, the wind holding its breath. Tyler took a step forward, voice low. "That bear, he saved her." The male's head turned slightly. Just enough to acknowledge the humans. Just enough to say, "I'm not going anywhere. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't mating season. This wasn't just survival. This was something older, something purer. This was loyalty." And the story had only just begun. The wounded female grizzly lay stretched out on the hot asphalt, her chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular breaths. Dust clung to the blood-matted fur around her ribs where the python had coiled. Each breath seemed like a question, one the forest itself was afraid to answer. Ranger Tyler Nash crouched a few feet away, careful not to move too fast. Around him, 3 other rangers whispered urgently, their eyes darting between the injured bear and the towering male still looming protectively beside her. It wasn't just his size that stopped them, it was the way he watched them. Not with fear, not even with hostility, but with something sharper, protective, possessive, as if daring them to step too close. "We've got to help her," Ranger Marissa whispered. "We will," Tyler said. "We just don't want to get mauled doing it." The male hadn't moved from her side since the snake had fled. He was pacing now in tight, anxious circles around her, occasionally lowering his head to nudge her snout with his own. Low, guttural grunts rumbled from his chest. The sound felt old, primal. It stirred something in every human heart watching. Then it happened. The female let out a soft, almost inaudible whimper. The male stopped pacing. The wounded female grizzly lay stretched out on the hot asphalt, her chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular breaths. Dust clung to the blood-matted fur around her ribs, where the python had coiled. Each breath seemed like a question, one the forest itself was afraid to answer. Ranger Tyler Nash crouched a few feet away, careful not to move too fast. Around him, 3 other rangers whispered urgently, their eyes darting between the injured bear and the towering male still looming protectively beside her. It wasn't just his size that stopped them. It was the way he watched them. Not with fear, not even with hostility, but with something sharper, protective, possessive, as if daring them to step too close. "We've got to help her," Ranger Marissa whispered. "We will," Tyler said. "We just don't want to get mauled doing it." The male hadn't moved from her side since the snake had fled. He was pacing now in tight, anxious circles around her, occasionally lowering his head to nudge her snout with his own. Low, guttural grunts rumbled from his chest. The sound felt old, primal. It stirred something in every human heart watching. Then it happened. The female let out a soft, almost inaudible whimper. The male stopped pacing. He looked at her, then looked at the humans. He stepped back. Not far. Just 2 paces. A subtle shift, but enough. Enough to say, "I'll let you try. But I'm still watching." Tyler felt his heart kick hard in his chest. He raised one hand slowly, palm out. "All right, girl," he murmured, as if speaking to a wounded dog. "We're going to help." The team moved carefully. Towels, gloves, a field stretcher. Marissa prepared a tranquilizer, not to knock the bear out entirely, just a sedative to ease her pain and keep her still. The male huffed when the needle went in, a low sound of protest, but he didn't charge. He stood stone still, breathing hard. When they began wrapping the bear's midsection, they saw the damage. Deep puncture wounds where the snake's fangs had struck, abrasions from the asphalt, purple bruises blooming beneath her fur. "She's going to make it," Marissa said under her breath, tightening the final strap on the stretcher. "But she needs treatment fast." The rangers hoisted her into the open bed of the nearest wildlife truck. The male bear followed. Step by step. The Wildlife Rescue Center wasn't built for this. In its long history, it had treated broken-winged eagles, orphaned moose calves, even the occasional mountain lion wounded by poachers. But 2 full-grown grizzly bears, one injured, the other refusing to leave her side, was beyond anything the staff had prepared for. Ash had become a fixture in the recovery room. No one told him to stay. No one dared to tell him to go. From the moment Ember was stabilized, he remained planted near her bed, his massive frame curled like a shadow of protection. What stunned the staff most wasn't his presence. It was his restraint. He didn't growl. He didn't pace. He didn't panic. Every time the medical team entered the room, he simply watched. When they changed bandages, he watched. When they injected fluids, he watched. When Evelyn checked vitals in the dead of night, he watched, with those deep, steady eyes that seemed to understand. Not wild eyes, witnessing eyes. Ash ate little, slept less. He barely moved except to adjust himself when Ember shifted. At times, he pressed his snout to her shoulder or emitted a soft chuff when she groaned in her sleep. It was as if he had become attuned to her very breath. "Most bonded bears separate once the danger passes," Evelyn murmured to Tyler one evening. "But he's still here." "She's not out of danger," Tyler replied. "Maybe he knows that." And maybe he did. The center kept the recovery room warm and dim. No restraints, no isolation chambers, just a soft enclosure surrounded by silence. The staff rotated shifts gently, avoiding any disruption. By the 3rd day, Ember's wounds had started to close. She could lift her head now, groggy but alert. Her eyes found Ash the moment they opened. And every time she saw him, her breathing steadied. By day 4, the internet had caught up. A volunteer snapped a photo. Ash lying beside Ember's medical bed, his paw resting inches from hers. The post went viral within hours. Devoted bear refuses to leave injured mate's side. Grizzly love story stuns wildlife center staff. The phones rang nonstop. News crews begged for access. The story made headlines, not for its strangeness, but for its emotion. Because people saw something they hadn't expected. They saw love. It wasn't just the public that felt it. Inside the center, the atmosphere had changed. Vets spoke in hushed voices around the bears. Rangers who'd once treated bears as dangerous and distant found themselves watching Ash as if he were something sacred. And he was. He had become a guardian. But there was a cost. Ash was beginning to deteriorate. They saw love. It wasn't just the public that felt it. Inside the center, the atmosphere had changed. Vets spoke in hushed voices around the bears. Rangers who'd once treated bears as dangerous and distant found themselves watching Ash as if he were something sacred. And he was. He had become a guardian. But there was a cost. Ash was beginning to deteriorate. He wouldn't leave the room, wouldn't eat more than a few bites, wouldn't step into the small outdoor pen prepared for him. The vet staff grew concerned. "He's shutting down," Evelyn told her team during a morning meeting. "Grief, trauma, stress, it's all compounding. If he doesn't rest or nourish himself, he might collapse before Ember recovers." The staff faced an impossible choice: risk separating them or risk losing Ash. That afternoon, the sky darkened unexpectedly. A rare June windstorm blew over the western rim of the park. It came fast, violent. A power line snapped. Inside the rescue center, the lights flickered. A loud pop echoed through the hallway. The machines in Ember's room beeped erratically. She jolted. Her body thrashed weakly in confusion. And Ash roared. The sound cracked through the building like a warning from the ancient world. He rose to his full height, fur bristling, teeth bared. The scent of stress, of noise, of something unnatural invading their space had awakened something in him. Not aggression. Fear. When a nurse stepped into the room, Ash snapped his jaws in the air. Not at her, but as a warning. "Don't come any closer." The staff froze. Tyler and Evelyn rushed in, hands raised. "It's okay, Ash," Evelyn said, her voice soft, steady. "She's all right. We're still here." Ash stood, chest heaving. His eyes scanned the blinking machines, the lights, the walls that no longer felt safe. Then Ember made a sound. A breath. Software familiar. Ash turned. Their eyes met. And the wild storm in him ebbed. He lowered himself, slowly. First his front legs, then his haunches, until he was curled beside her again. He exhaled. The room fell still. That night, Evelyn wrote in her private case notes, "Ash is not reacting out of instinct or threat. He is reacting out of attachment, out of fear of loss. This is not a territorial bear. This is a grieving one." She didn't show anyone that entry, but everyone in the center felt it. Ash wasn't here because of hunger or power or dominance. He was here because, somewhere along the way, he had decided that Ember mattered more than anything else. And until she was strong enough to walk again, he would not move. They weren't just watching an animal bond anymore. They were witnessing devotion. They saw love. It wasn't just the public that felt it. Inside the center, the atmosphere had changed. Vets spoke in hushed voices around the bears. Rangers who'd once treated bears as dangerous and distant found themselves watching Ash as if he were something sacred. And he was. He had become a guardian. But there was a cost. Ash was beginning to deteriorate. He wouldn't leave the room, wouldn't eat more than a few bites, wouldn't step into the small outdoor pen prepared for him. The vet staff grew concerned. "He's shutting down," Evelyn told her team during a morning meeting. "Grief, trauma, stress, it's all compounding. If he doesn't rest or nourish himself, he might collapse before Ember recovers." The staff faced an impossible choice: risk separating them or risk losing Ash. That afternoon, the sky darkened unexpectedly. A rare June windstorm blew over the western rim of the park. It came fast, violent. A power line snapped. Inside the rescue center, the lights flickered. A loud pop echoed through the hallway. The machines in Ember's room beeped erratically. She jolted. Her body thrashed weakly in confusion. And Ash! Ash roared. The sound cracked through the building like a warning from the ancient world. He rose to his full height, fur bristling, teeth bared. The scent of stress, of noise, of something unnatural invading their space had awakened something in him. Not aggression. Fear. When a nurse stepped into the room, Ash snapped his jaws in the air. Not at her, but as a warning. Don't come any closer. The staff froze. Tyler and Evelyn rushed in, hands raised. It's okay, Ash, Evelyn said, her voice soft, steady. She's all right. We're still here. Ash stood, chest heaving. His eyes scanned the blinking machines, the lights, the walls that no longer felt safe. Then Ember made a sound. A breath. Software familiar. Ash turned. Their eyes met. And the wild storm in him ebbed. He lowered himself, slowly. First his front legs, then his haunches, until he was curled beside her again. He exhaled. The room fell still. That night, Evelyn wrote in her private case notes. When the gurney entered, she stirred. She didn't resist. She trusted the routine now. But Ash stood. He paced as they moved closer. Tyler raised a hand. It's okay, boy. Just a short trip. Ash didn't challenge, but he didn't back away either. He followed every movement. When they rolled Ember into the transport crate, Ash walked beside it. When the doors opened into the reintegration enclosure, he pressed his body against the fence, ears twitching. Inside, Ember was laid beneath a pine tree, her limbs splayed, nostrils flaring as she inhaled the scent of forest and fresh earth. The door closed. Ash let out a low, guttural sound. Not a roar, not a cry. A protest. A plea. Then he lay down beside the fence and waited. For 2 days, he didn't leave the gate. He didn't pace. He didn't sleep. He simply lay with his body pressed close to the steel, like a shadow made of fur. Ember, inside, paced. She sniffed the trees, searched the perimeter, drank from the artificial stream. But her eyes always drifted back to that same spot in the fence line. Evelyn watched them from the cameras. They're not letting go, she said. But on the third morning, something changed. Ash didn't appear at the gate. Instead, cameras picked him up wandering through the woods just outside the center's perimeter, sniffing trees, digging shallow patches in the earth, reacquainting himself with the wild. And Ember? She didn't panic. She stood tall, ate slowly. And when she lay beneath the tree that afternoon, she didn't face the fence. She faced the woods. Evelyn took a breath. It's time. They opened the gate. No handlers, no leash. Just an open passage into the greater Yellowstone. And Ember stepped through. She limped. She hesitated, but she crossed the line that marked captivity from freedom. Ash wasn't waiting, but his tracks were there. Fresh, parallel, side by side. Over the following weeks, Ember's tracking collar pinged across various points in the river basin. Ash's signal, faint and infrequent, always hovered nearby. They never appeared together, not on camera, not in person. But their presence lingered in the same clearings, the same game trails, the same resting hollows beneath wind-bent trees. Then, one early autumn morning, senior biologist Rachel Myers made a report. She was hiking through a glade just beyond the southern fork when she spotted them. First Ash, atop a ridge, ears perked. Then Ember, emerging from the tree line. They didn't run to each other. They didn't vocalize. They simply moved in the same direction. Ash waited. Ember approached. He nuzzled her shoulder gently. Not as a conqueror, not even as a partner, as a guardian. And from that moment forward, they traveled as one, but differently. Ash no longer led. He followed. Just behind. Just enough. Evelyn watched the footage and murmured, She's healed. And now he guards from a distance. The forest was not without danger. Rumors of poachers circled again. Traps had reappeared. The air grew colder. But wherever Ember was spotted, Ash wasn't far. And wherever Ash went, the forest seemed to hold its breath. They had survived. Together. But their bond, once tested by death, was about to face a new kind of fire. Autumn fell over Yellowstone with a breath of gold and silence. The sun cast long shadows through the thinning canopy, and the forest floor glowed with leaves the color of fire. The crispness in the air brought movement to the valley. Elk began their migrations, coyotes sang more often at dusk, and bears, sensing the shift, started to prepare for winter. Ash and Ember were among them. Together, though never overly close. Ash had changed since Ember's release. Where once he lingered at her side, now he trailed behind. Not far. Never far. But he let her lead. The collar on Ember pinged softly every few hours, placing her deep in the southern stretch near the river basin. Ash's collar was less predictable. Faint signals came through every day or so, always in the general vicinity, like a shadow refusing to disappear. The rangers monitored them carefully, though from a distance. They wanted to let them be wild, but the wild was no longer safe. 2 weeks into October, a trap was found near the riverbank. An old-style snare, rusted, illegal, cruel. It had been set along a known game trail. Blood marked the ground nearby. Not much, but enough to make hearts pound. A ranger retrieved what was left behind. A torn length of synthetic material and a shredded wildlife collar. Panic spread. "Is it Ash?" Evelyn asked as she examined the damage. "Or Ember?" Tyler didn't answer. He was already packing his bag. Within hours, teams were dispatched into the Southern Territory. Drones lifted into the sky. Ground teams swept known trails. Tyler hiked alone into the deeper forest. He moved fast. Quiet. The trees here were denser. The trails twisted. The deeper he went, the more the world hushed. Then, near a narrow ravine, he found her. Ember. She wasn't injured, but she was frantic. She paced in a tight line near a cluster of fallen trees, her nose to the ground, her ears flicking in every direction. When she saw Tyler, she didn't run. She growled low, a warning, a cry. He followed her gaze and heard it, a groan, rough, pained. He pushed through a curtain of brush and saw Ash. Lying on his side, one leg grotesquely twisted. The crude metal of the snare dug deep into his foreleg. Blood soaked the dirt. The smell was thick and sickening. Ash blinked up at him, eyes wide, glassy, pain-filled, but not afraid, he remembered. Tyler dropped to one knee. "We've got you, buddy. Hang on." Behind him, Ember paced. Closer now, closer than ever. But she didn't interfere. She watched. Tyler radioed for help. Within 30 minutes, the team arrived. They worked fast, laying out sedatives, prepping the gurney. No one spoke much. Ash didn't fight. Even as they touched the leg, cut the snare, lifted him, he didn't panic. He knew. And Ember? She followed. All the way to the road, all the way to the transport truck. She didn't climb in, but she stayed until the last tire rolled away. Back at the center, the mood was somber. Ash was laid on the operating table. The snare had done more than slice skin. It had crushed tendons, bruised bone, shredded muscle. Evelyn stood over him, gloves bloodied, jaw clenched. "I don't know if he'll ever walk right again," she said quietly. But Tyler was steady. "If anyone can recover," he said, "it's him." The surgery took hours. They flushed the wound, stitched what they could, bandaged the rest. Ash never stirred. And when he finally awoke, his first action wasn't to growl or flinch. It was to blink. Then rest. Like before, he understood. They were trying to save him. The next week was a trial. Ash was kept in a clean room, warm and quiet. His leg was wrapped in thick gauze. He couldn't stand. Not yet. But each day he tried. They wheeled him outside in a crate for fresh air. And each morning, Ember waited at the fence. She didn't growl. She didn't cry. She just sat, present. When he stumbled during a short assisted walk, he let out a huff of pain. She answered, a low chuff. Steady. Solid. And he tried again. Evelyn wrote in her notes, Ash's healing is tied to her voice, to her presence. We see it in every movement, every rise, every try. After 3 weeks, Ash walked. It wasn't perfect. He limped. His leg dragged slightly. But he moved. And more importantly, he wanted to. The final gate stood waiting. Beyond it, the forest. And beside him, his reason. Soon, they would return. Not as myths, not as symbols, but as 2 lives changed by trust, tested by pain, and carried forward by something the wild never brags about. Love. The forest waited. Beyond the gates of the Wildlife Center, the trees stood tall and still, their limbs heavy with the final colors of fall. The crisp wind whispered down from the mountains, sweeping through the valley like a quiet drumbeat. Ash was ready. Not fully healed. Not as he once was, but strong enough. His walk would never be the same. His leg, permanently scarred, dragged slightly with every step. But the look in his eyes, steady, alert, determined, had returned. And he was not alone. Ember had remained close through his entire recovery. Every morning, she waited at the fence line. Every afternoon, she followed his crate as it was wheeled outdoors. And now, as the team prepared for their release, she stood near the transport gate, her breath visible in the chill air, watching. Evelyn approached Tyler, clipboard in hand. He passed his last mobility test. The leg will always limit him, but he's adapted better than we expected. Tyler nodded. And mentally? He wants to be out there, Evelyn said. He's ready, and she is too. They kept the release simple. No crowds, no media. Just Tyler, Evelyn, and 2 silent rangers. They chose a spot deep in a protected clearing, miles from any trail, trapline, or road. A place where the bears could vanish into wildness without interference. The back gate lowered with a soft creak. Ash stepped out first. His gait was uneven, but powerful. His shoulders rippled beneath his thick coat. He paused, nostrils flaring, tasting the air. Then Ember emerged behind him. She didn't rush. She walked close, but not touching. As they reached the forest edge, she stopped. Ash turned. Their eyes met. No growl, no call, just a breath. Then they stepped forward together, slipping into the trees like a dream ending in daylight. Tyler watched them disappear. Take care of her, he whispered. Evelyn added, just beneath her breath. She took care of you. In the weeks that followed, sightings were rare, but the signs were there. Tracks side by side. Scratch marks on familiar trees. A camera trap image capturing 2 shapes in the moonlight, one tall, one smaller, moving through the snow. They were out there, together. And slowly, the story that had captured the world began to fade from headlines. People moved on. New crises came, new wonders emerged. But in Yellowstone, in that stretch of forest that had borne witness to pain and recovery, the bond remained. One crisp morning in midwinter, a drone survey team captured an image. A sunlit clearing. Ember lying curled in the snow, her body relaxed, breath steady. Ash nearby. He stood slightly uphill, framed by pines, his head high, watching. His leg was still stiff. But his eyes, sharp and bright, never left her. It wasn't spectacle, it wasn't performance. It was devotion. Quiet. Constant. Fierce. The kind that doesn't need words. The kind that survives and heals and returns to the only place it ever belonged. Home. Winter fell hard over Yellowstone. The rivers slowed under a sheen of ice. Trees groaned under the weight of snow, and the forest, once loud with bird song and rushing streams, fell into a hush. But beneath the silence, life continued. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, Ash and Ember moved together through the snow-covered world. Slowly, carefully, bound not just by instinct, but by experience. Their days were spent foraging, walking, resting. Their nights curled under thickets, close enough to share warmth, far enough to remain alert. Though the bears weren't seen often, their presence was undeniable. Rangers found fresh prints in the snow, scratch marks on frozen bark, broken branches near old salmon beds, the marks of two creatures surviving together, and always together. Back at the Wildlife Center, a quiet monitor continued to track Ember's caller. The signal was faint, but consistent. She remained mostly in the southern lowlands, close to the riverbanks where the water still flowed and game passed often. Ash's collar had failed, likely torn off or buried under heavy coat, but his presence followed Ember's like a second shadow. Evelyn checked the logs each morning. Still close, she'd whisper to herself. He's still watching. Then, in early January, something changed. The collar signal paused. It didn't vanish. It simply stopped moving. 3 days, no shift, no travel. Just a static ping from a dense cluster of trees near Bear Claw Hollow, a known hibernation site. Evelyn narrowed her eyes at the map. She's bedding down. And Ash? Tyler asked. She smiled faintly. You know where he is. 2 rangers were sent to observe from a safe distance. No interference, just silent confirmation. They found the tracks first, deep paw prints leading into a narrow ravine dusted in snow. Then the den. Half buried beneath a fallen tree, branches packed in tightly. Inside, silence. Peace. But just beyond the entrance, lying in a carved-out hollow of snow, was Ash. He wasn't in the den. He was guarding it, head resting on crossed forearms, eyes barely open, breathing slow and even. He had taken his place not beside Ember, but outside, watching, waiting, warding off the world. The Rangers didn't go closer. They didn't need to. Weeks passed. Snow fell thicker, wind howled louder. But Ash remained. Sometimes camera traps caught him pacing, stretching, digging for roots. But never far, never gone. His position remained the same, the guardian at the gate. And inside, Ember rested. Safe. The team began calling the site the Winter Watch. Not a den, not a nest, a vigil. One morning in late February, the collar pinged movement. Ember was stirring. Evelyn leaned forward, breath held. Come on, girl. By nightfall, both bears had moved. Together. Out of the den. Down the ravine, slowly, side by side. Ember thinner, but healthy. Ash stiff, but standing. Winter was breaking. And they were still here. In the wild, survival is often about solitude, about taking what you need, moving fast, leaving others behind. But Ash and Ember had broken that rule. They had made something else, something harder, something braver. They had made a bond. And through the coldest nights, in the stillest snow, they had proven what few ever get the chance to. Loyalty doesn't sleep, not even in winter. And love doesn't hide, not when it's watching, not when it's needed most. Spring returned to Yellowstone with a soft insistence. Snow retreated in slow patches, revealing earth eager to breathe again. Rivers swelled. Birds returned. And with them came the hidden dangers that had only slept through winter, not disappeared. Ash and Ember re-emerged into this waking world. They were thinner, but strong, their coats shedding winter's weight. The world around them bloomed with food and movement. But it also bloomed with threat. On the first warm day of April, a trap was found again. Near Bear Claw Hollow. Fresh, functional. Tyler's voice was tight over the radio. It's starting again. 3 more snares were discovered that week. Some old, some newly set. Baited with fish, rigged with barbed wire, hidden with malicious intent. Poachers were moving early this season, and the center knew, if Ash or Ember walked into one of those traps again, the outcome might not be survivable. We need eyes on them, Evelyn said during an emergency meeting. Constant, night and day. But collar data was growing erratic. Ember's tracker had begun failing. Batteries dying. Range weakening. We might lose them, Tyler admitted. Soon. That night, Evelyn stood alone at the observation monitors, her fingers tracing the faint ping on the screen. "Stay together," she whispered. "Please stay smart." Then the signal vanished. Both callers. Gone. No trace, no ping, no trail, just silence. The team launched a full search. Drones were deployed, rangers dispatched, motion-triggered cameras activated. For days, nothing. Then, on a quiet morning, a report came in. Two hikers, experienced, trusted, had spotted movement near Frostshade Valley. A large bear, then a second, one limping slightly, both disappearing into the mist. Tyler and two rangers were sent immediately. They moved fast, cutting through miles of thawing terrain, passing familiar ravines and old shelter sites. And then they found it. The signs were subtle but clear: disturbed earth, claw marks, blood, fresh, and worse, drag lines. Ash had found the poachers first. The conclusion was easy to draw. He had fought. He had tried to drive them off, to defend Ember, or perhaps to defend others. But the evidence was there: boot prints, shell casings, a discarded snare, and a blood trail leading into dense brush. The rangers followed it with rifles drawn. Then, in the clearing, they found him. Ash. He was lying down, breathing, bleeding from a gunshot wound to his shoulder, but alive. And next to him, pressed tight, was Ember. She wasn't injured, but she had refused to leave. Her face lifted when she saw Tyler. She didn't growl, she simply looked. Back at the center, the urgency returned. Ash was rushed into surgery again. The bullet had torn through flesh and clipped bone. A clean break, but painful. Difficult. Evelyn's hands trembled as she worked. "He did it again," she muttered. Protected her, just like before. Tyler stood behind her, fists clenched. "We'll find who did it." Outside, Ember paced. She couldn't be moved indoors. Not this time. She was too alert, too wild. But she wouldn't leave the building either. She waited at the threshold, every muscle taut. When Ash was wheeled out hours later, patched, sedated, barely conscious, she followed. Step for step. And that night, they were kept in the open enclosure together. No walls, no barriers, just trust. Rangers combed the area. 2 days later, they found a campsite abandoned in haste. Evidence of illegal activity, maps, tags, photos, and in a muddy envelope, a list of animals, targets. Ash's collar number was circled. They had been hunting him. The story spread fast. The public, already familiar with Ash and Ember, exploded with outrage. Donations poured in, letters of protest, calls for tighter protections. But the team didn't care about press. They only cared about one thing: keeping Ash alive. For the second time in his life, he pulled through. Weaker now, slower, but awake. And when Ember pressed her head against his gently the morning he stood again, it wasn't just affection. It was defiance. They were still here, still choosing each other, still refusing to surrender. In Yellowstone, predators stalk in silence. But sometimes, so do protectors. And this time, the reckoning wasn't theirs to face. It was ours. Summer returned quietly to Yellowstone. There was no celebration, no fanfare, just the slow rise of green through the thawed soil, the return of birdsong, and the waking rhythm of wild things reclaiming their lives. Ash and Ember had survived. Barely, but they had. Ash's second recovery was slower, more painful. The bullet wound had healed externally, but his body moved differently now. He limped with more difficulty, rising slower, resting longer. But what he lost in strength, he had gained in calm. And he still had Ember. She remained by him through the final stages of care, until the staff agreed. It was time. Time to let them go. Time to trust again. Their release was simple. Same forest. Same gate. Ash stepped out with care. He didn't run, didn't hesitate. He moved as one who knew pain and peace intimately, and who now understood what waited on the other side of a closing door. Ember followed, slow and steady. This time, they didn't stop to look back. They disappeared into the trees. Together. Weeks passed, then months. Sightings came and went. Ash was seen once on a ridge, silhouetted against a thunderstorm sky. Ember was spotted digging near a stream. A camera trap caught them passing through a meadow at dusk, closer than before, yet quieter, like ghosts of their own story. But something else happened too. A new pattern. Tracks. 3 sets. One large, one smaller, and one tiny. It wasn't confirmed for weeks. Not until Evelyn, reviewing remote drone footage late one night, froze the video. There they were. Ash and Ember, side by side, and trailing behind them, barely visible in the tall grass, was a cub. Small, unsteady. But there. Proof of something more. The news swept through the center like wind through trees. Cheers, tears, laughter that didn't need words, because it meant everything. It meant the impossible bond had created life. The public learned soon after, photos, headlines. Ash and Ember, a family born in the wild. Donations to the park tripled. Conservation laws were reviewed. Poaching patrols were expanded. But more than anything, it sparked something deep in those who followed their journey. Hope. That love in the wild wasn't a myth. That loyalty wasn't just human. That devotion could live in silence and be no less true. Tyler returned to the forest the following spring. He stood at the clearing where Ash had once fought for Ember's life, where a story had begun. And he smiled. Because in the soft earth beside his boots were 4 paw prints, leading away together. In the end, Ash and Ember didn't become legends because they were rare. They became legends because they were real. Because they reminded the world of something forgotten. That love, true love, is not about possession or power. It is about presence, about staying, even when it hurts, even when it's hard, and especially when it matters most. If this story moved you, share it. Because sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones we invent. They're the ones nature tells us when we finally learn to listen.